I used to believe every home was like mine, quiet, controlled, and filled with rules that didn't always make sense. As a child, you don't question the world you grow up in. You simply accept it. My earliest memories of my father were strange ones, though I didn't realize it at the time. He wasn't cruel in the way movies show villains to be. He didn't shout much, and he never drank. In fact, to the outside world, he seemed calm, intelligent, and oddly charming. Neighbors admired him. Teachers respected him. When people talked about him, they used words like disciplined and strong. But living with him felt different. My father believed emotions were weaknesses. He said feelings were tools people used to manipulate others. If I cried as a child, he would watch me silently, his eyes cold and curious. "Why are you doing that?" he would ask. "I'm sad," I once said when I was 6. "Sadness is a choice," he replied calmly. "Stop choosing it." So I did my best to stop. He raised me with strict routines. Every morning started at exactly 5:30 a.m. I had to make my bed perfectly, eat breakfast in silence, and finish reading a chapter from whatever book he had chosen for me that week. He believed discipline built intelligence. But there were things about him that confused me. Once, when I was 8, I found a small injured bird in the backyard. Its wing was bent, and it was shaking. I ran inside and begged my father to help. He followed me outside and crouched beside the bird, studying it like a scientist observing an experiment. "It's suffering," I said. "We should take it to a vet." He looked at me with a faint smile. "Why?" "Because it's hurt." "Yes," he said. "But why does that matter to you?" I didn't know how to answer. Instead of helping, he picked up the bird gently and placed it in a box. Then he told me to watch carefully. He explained how pain worked, how animals reacted to injury, and how life was fragile. It wasn't cruel exactly, but it wasn't kind either. The bird didn't survive the night. I cried quietly in my room. The next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. As I grew older, I started noticing other differences between my father and other parents. At school events, he smiled perfectly, shaking hands and making polite conversations. Teachers loved him. They told me how lucky I was to have such a supportive father. But at home, that warmth disappeared. He never hugged me. He never said, "I love you." Instead, he observed me constantly, like I was a project he was studying. If I laughed too loudly, he'd say, "Control yourself." If I showed fear, he'd say, "Fear is useful only if it makes you smarter." Sometimes he would ask strange questions. "If your friend fell into a river, would you save them?" "Yes," I would answer. "Even if you might drown?" I hesitated. He nodded slightly, as if analyzing my response. "Most people would say yes," he said. "But most people are irrational." When I was 12, I began to realize something was wrong. A new student named Sam joined my class. Sam was shy and quiet, and some kids started bullying him. One afternoon I saw them pushing him near the lockers. Without thinking, I stepped in and told them to stop. They laughed at me but eventually left. Sam looked shocked. "Why did you do that?" he asked. I shrugged. "Because it wasn't fair." That evening, I told my father what happened, expecting him to be proud. Instead, he looked disappointed. "You risked becoming a target yourself," he said. But he needed help. My father leaned back in his chair, studying me with that same cold curiosity. "Kindness," he said slowly, "is often a form of weakness. People exploit it." But it felt right. He didn't argue further. He just nodded slightly. That was the moment I began to suspect that my father saw the world differently than everyone else. In high school, the gap between us grew larger. I started volunteering at a small community center, helping younger kids with homework. I liked the feeling of making someone's day a little easier. When my father found out, he asked a simple question. "What do you gain from that?" "Nothing," I said. "I just like helping." He stared at me for a long moment. That makes no logical sense. Maybe it didn't. But for the first time in my life, I realized something important. My father didn't understand kindness. He understood intelligence, strategy, discipline, and control, but not empathy. And yet, strangely, he never stopped me. He watched. Observed. Analyzed. One night when I was 17, we were sitting at the dinner table in silence when he suddenly asked, "Do you think I'm a bad person?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't know," I admitted. He didn't look offended. If anything, he seemed interested. "Most people would answer that emotionally," he said. "You didn't." I hesitated before asking the question that had been growing in my mind for years. "Why don't you feel things the way other people do?" For the first time, he didn't respond immediately. Finally, he said quietly, "Because I was born different." There was no shame in his voice. Just a calm acceptance. "Does that bother you?" he asked. I thought about the bird, the strange lessons, the cold observations. I thought about the way he had raised me like an experiment. But I also thought about something else. Despite everything, he had never stopped me from becoming the opposite of him. "You could have taught me to be like you," I said. That he gave a faint smile. I wanted to see what would happen if I didn't. Years later, I learned the word that described him. Psychopath. It explained the emotional emptiness, the calculated behavior, the lack of empathy, but strangely, I didn't hate him. Because while he didn't understand kindness, he allowed it to exist in our home through me. Her eyes widened. "Why?" "Because kindness like yours is rare," he said simply. "And I invest in rare things." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied. She shook her head, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said gently. For a moment, she just stared at him. Then, through tears and disbelief, she nodded. "Yes." Weeks later, Noah was laughing again. The apartment had been replaced with a small but clean home. The constant weight of fear had lifted, replaced by something unfamiliar but beautiful, hope. Amelia stood by the window one evening, watching the city lights flicker to life. Her life had changed in ways she never imagined. Not because she was lucky, but because, in the moment it mattered most, she chose love over fear. And someone had been there to notice. Across the city, in an office high above the streets, Daniel Carter looked out over the skyline. People often asked him the secret to his success. He never gave them the full answer. But if he did, it would be simple. Sometimes, the best investments aren't in businesses. They're in people. And sometimes, all it takes to change everything is one act of kindness.